Protected Speech with Ravi Kapur and Jonathan Choe.
With Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur for another edition of Protected Speech, and we're going to get right into some dynamic political shifts going on. A lot of this going on in that great state of Washington where Jonathan is situated. And I want to start with Kshama Sawant, who very controversial figure politically, even in her hometown of Seattle, where she's had to battle a couple of recall initiatives, but she's come out on top multiple times. Well, she announced that she is not going to pursue another term on the Seattle City Council. Jonathan, you know Kshama Sawant well, have been covering her for years. Give us a sense of what this means, because she's not necessarily getting out of the conversation, so to speak.
Yeah, not at all. And she's going to finish her term. She's the longest tenured on the Seattle City Council, about 10 years now. So at least for her district, which is more quote unquote progressive, leaning far left, there's going to be another candidate like Kshama Sawant. But at the same time, she is quite a unique individual and one of the most influential in this sort of self-described socialist slash communist party. And what she's going to be focused on is really now this national labor movement. She's been really at the forefront of pushing this tax on Amazon and, trying to raise the minimum wage for, again, blue collar workers out there. So she's really kind of, carrying this banner, and she's going to take her messaging national. And she has quite a following and backing as well. So she isn't going away anytime soon.
Well, she's been monitoring our activity. I know she certainly has interacted with you, and she's really going to get her name out there nationally. Talk about her impact. I mean, before we move on to some of these other leaders, and actually I want to make a point that we're going to talk about a number of Indian American women that are making strides politically at the local level, state level, and national level. What's Sawant's legacy in Washington State and specifically in Seattle?
Well, somebody who marched to the beat of her own drummer. In many cases, she did not align with many of the Seattle City Council members. And again, she's always been accused of being extremely far left. But, you have to commend her in many ways because she's been also extremely effective. She has been recalled numerous times, but survived that. There were attempts to recall her. She survived that. And of course, she's had so many infamous moments. She took, at the height of the 2020 BLM protests, she took a crowd in front of former Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin's house because she didn't agree with Mayor Durkin and led a charge to impeach her. At the same time, she opened up Seattle City Hall to a bunch of marchers at the height of COVID. I was there following the crowd, and I interviewed her on the ground. One of my most memorable moments covering her, and she was open to talking about her agenda. But I want to be very clear, even at the height of BLM and even throughout, she's extremely disciplined with her messaging. A lot of the people from the outside were thinking BLM was all about just race. No, Kshama Sawant used these movements and sort of these flashpoints whenever they emerged in the city to, again, piggyback off of these movements, push her communist, socialist, working class agenda. So I thought that was quite strategic, brilliant, and again, it's her focus and discipline that has gotten to her, at this level.
Now, we know Bernie Sanders made quite an impact, especially in 2016, running for president, kind of got that moniker, democratic socialism, out there. Is Sawant a democratic socialist the way Bernie Sanders is, or is she a different strain?
Yeah, I don't even know what that means anymore, but she is definitely leading the charge. And I would argue she is on the extreme far left. Look, Kshama Sawant right now, I can tell you on the ground, has also faced a lot of criticism for all of her accomplishments and the fact she's championed by so many here in the progressive community, especially her district, which also includes Capitol Hill. She's also been accused of neglecting the basic issues in her district, which includes the spike in crime and also the homeless crisis. She represents Little Saigon, and the crime and the illegal drug use, the encampments have exploded there, but she's MIA. That's the knock on her. She's not dealing with the local issues on the ground here in Seattle in her district. And, her constituents are flailing out there. And yet she's more focused on national issues. And clearly, look, she's not running anymore. Now we know why.
I think that's a criticism many politicians get, especially those that end up in Congress. Do you think that because she's had this national platform advocating for her, her methodologies, that she might be someone to run for Congress from even further to the left than Pramila Jayapal, who is also in Congress right now, running on a platform to the left.
Well, look, I could be wrong here, but I think it's really interesting what's happening right now. She's really testing the national waters. If you ask the average, voter out there who's Shama Sawant, I think most will say who. They don't know who she is unless you're in this area in the Seattle, Washington State region. But at the same time, I feel like this country is kind of pushing back against the far left sort of progressive movements that have emerged in the past few years because of what it's led to. Again, another criticism of Sawant is that she was advocating, on the surface for a quote unquote peaceful protest, but at the same time, she wasn't condemning Antifa. Many of her supporters who are Antifa going around the city of Seattle and trashing these businesses. In fact, she's been accused of wanting that to continue and the homeless encampments staying put because it shows that the current capitalism system isn't working. So she's a really complicated character. But we'll see whether or not her message resonates nationally, especially with the next election cycle.
Well, that's right. And I do want to talk about Pramila Jayapal now, who's been in Congress now for a number of years, the first Indian American woman ever elected to Congress. She represents Seattle and certainly is basically one of the leaders of the progressive movement. I don't know if Sawant would be in that same group as some of the folks designated as the squad. But in terms of folks that are actually in Congress, there's no question Jayapal is amongst those leaders there. She was actually named to an immigration panel in the House Judiciary, first immigrant woman ever to lead that committee. I'm curious to get your thoughts on Jayapal, and especially the fact that now maybe she might face some pressure from even further to the left.
And I was just going to say, she already is. And to tie that loop on Shama Sawant, in her parting letter, when she announced that she wasn't going to run again for Seattle City Council, she actually went after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as well as Pramila Jayapal, for not being progressive enough, essentially accusing them, again, these two leaders, elected officials who ran on progressivism, for not following through on their progressive promises. So that just goes to show you who Shama Sawant is. Look, if she's going to start calling people out and following her own convictions, you know what? She better follow through as well. But Shama Sawant, again, she's cut from a different cloth. She marches to the beat of her own drummer. She's calling out Pramila Jayapal, AOC, before she leaves for not being progressive enough. So I think getting back to Jayapal, look, she keeps elevating herself. She is quite accomplished, has tremendous respect, and especially in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, that's why she's being named to all these committees and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I think Sawant and some of Jayapal's critics may have a point that Pramila Jayapal has now kind of become this, typical corporate politician, and she's going to have to sort of break out of that. And again, another knock on Jayapal is that she isn't really around for her constituents because she's constantly in D.C., but there's so many issues going on in Seattle, again, getting back to the homeless crisis, drug addiction crisis, and the spike in crime.
It's interesting because Jayapal came out of the nonprofit sector before she got into Congress and was a real activist, right, on the ground, grassroots, building that rapport. And again, for someone like me covering politics, especially Indian Americans and South Asians getting involved in national and even state, local level politics, to see a voice like Pramila Jayapal win an election was stunning. But we're seeing more and more leaders of that background get involved. And the new name that I've just recently heard about because I really wasn't following her closely is Shasti Conrad, who's now going to be running the Democratic Party in Washington State. She's been involved in King County for a number of years, but I'm wondering, Jonathan, what context you have. I mean, now we have three Indian American women heavily involved in the political realm in Washington State. It's actually fascinating to watch from afar.
And it goes to show you the direction of the Democratic Party in Washington State is headed, because all three women lean quote unquote left and progressive, and that's the direction this state is going, right? And Conrad is extremely accomplished. A Princeton University grad. She served in the Obama administration as an intern and leveraged that into a job in the West Wing, and now she's only 38 years old and leading the entire state party for the Democrats. So she is obviously an Indian American and female, and is expected to bring in fresh ideas. But again, from an outsider's perspective or from the Republicans' perspective, again, it's a sign that the Democratic Party really wants to go down this road, at least in Washington State, progressive and more left than it's ever been.
And she had the backing and the blessing of Governor Jay Inslee, someone we're going to talk about a little bit later in this program because Jonathan deals with the folks all over that state. And another person that we want to get into now on the other side of the aisle
Yeah.
is Harmeet Dillon, another very vociferous person in the Republican Party, very, very much advocating for the conservative movement. And what's unusual about her is that she's actually based in San Francisco, which is, let's be real here, one of the most liberal parts of this country and the real bastion of Democratic policies. I mean, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, Willie Brown. We've had a whole set of leaders coming out of San Francisco. Dianne Feinstein, who's still the U.S. Senator from California. Quite a few leaders out of San Francisco, and to have Harmeet Dillon aimed to be the chair of the Republican National Committee was quite stunning. She's had quite a rise in that party, getting support from both President Trump as well as Governor DeSantis in Florida. Did not win that chairmanship, fell short, got roughly about half the votes that that the existing chairwoman got, Ronna McDaniel, but still quite a showing for Harmeet Dillon to push for that chair.
Yeah, and I'm wondering why she didn't get it. Of course, we have to think. She has a Sikh background as well, and her minority status, her ethnicity. Did that play a role? Because I think the GOP right now is trying to figure out its own identity moving forward as well, right? While Democrats continue to go more diverse when it comes to the ethnicity piece, and Democrats again are known for advocating for the LGBTQ community, the trans community, pretty much now everything else under the sun. Once again, they elect a white female, and they had this opportunity to bring in Dillon, and I think she's going to be a player regardless. I think it's just not the right time for her. But there are many Republicans now who want fresh blood and they want that more kind of diverse perspective. So I think Dillon's going to continue to be a player in the party.
Well, and I think the argument she made, and I think effectively, it is hard to win that position, especially with an incumbent who is connected to Mitt Romney, who's the senator out of Utah, who also ran for president. She's the niece of Mitt Romney. So to be able to knock someone off their perch and incumbent, it's very hard. But to get, about a third of the votes to at least get an acknowledgement from President Trump, who still is a big figure in the GOP, to say, he wanted the ladies to fight it out, but he
Yeah.
didn't dismiss Harmeet's candidacy. And then certainly she got support from DeSantis, who's an up and coming figure who could be the GOP nominee at some point. So the fact that she is recognized and got a lot of support even from the establishment media bases like Fox News, where she's able to go there and advocate and get her messaging out, that's a big deal. So in 2 years from now, we'll see what happens. I think the biggest argument she made is that the GOP really fell short on their projections over the last three election cycles. I mean, in the 2022 race was a huge disappointment to the GOP. They thought they would have an overwhelming House majority. They did not accomplish that. They lost a seat in the Senate. And of course, President Biden is in office. And so right now, they don't have much to stand on. In 2024, we'll see if that dynamic changes. But it gives Harmeet Dillon a chance to fight for the seat once again in a couple of years.
Yeah, she's going to be a player, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and of course, she did mention that there were a few folks that may not have supported her because of her Sikh faith, and certainly the numbers indicate that she fell short. And we'll see if that becomes an issue moving forward. The GOP certainly trying to diversify, and I know of the overtures towards Indian Americans and South Asians more broadly in recent years. We had never seen that from the GOP, but that's one of the reasons I think Harmeet Dillon is certainly someone to look out for
And I think
in the
that's
years
why
to come.
Nikki Haley is running as well for president. She's going to make an announcement February 15th.
And that's right. So Nikki Haley, of course, who is another woman of Sikh origin, another Indian American woman who's won elections. She was the governor of South Carolina, and of course the ambassador to the United Nations from the U.S. In the Trump administration. She is announcing that she's running for president. Of course, this was coming, much like we saw President Trump in recent months, kind of hinting that he's going to run again in 2024. I think this is all posturing and positioning. I mean, Jonathan, you and I have heard different things from some of these political operatives. I think Haley, to me, has been associated with DeSantis. If a DeSantis Haley ticket presented itself, I think that would be very attractive to a lot of mainstream Republicans, folks that maybe are turned off by what happened during the Trump years. Of course, Trump has still a huge bastion of support. So, what do you make of Haley running at this point? Is this maybe a mechanism for her to position
Yeah, so
herself as the top dog, or maybe a VP candidate?
exactly. I mean, I think she's positioning herself as a VP candidate. Standalone right now, I don't think the timing's right for her, but I think she's starting to see what's happening across the nation, and within the GOP as well. And they want diversity. They want females. And I'm with you in the sense that I'm hearing the rumors as well. The DeSantis Nikki Haley ticket. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump ends up becoming the nominee, that he would recruit Haley as well to maybe be his VP. Again, she served under him and was appointed UN ambassador under the Trump administration. So she has a relationship with Donald Trump. She's talking, no doubt, behind the scenes, positioning herself. But I think this is just kind of posturing right now. I don't think she has a shot to be the presidential nominee, but I think she could be a viable VP candidate for whoever gets the nomination.
And if you look at the way she exited the Trump administration, you saw so many people basically booted out. Famously, I mean, there's a number of folks that got shown the door during that administration. But Haley was one of the very few that was able to exit gracefully and leave on her own terms and be able to set the narrative. And that wasn't true for so many of the other folks that were in that administration. So I think from that standpoint, she is positioning herself, has been for a number of years. No question, she's had her eyes on this prize for a long time. Very similar, I think, in many respects to another Indian American woman we know, Vice President Kamala Harris, who played her cards, did run for president a couple of years ago, fell short, left the race early enough to get considered for the VP nod, and that's when Biden picked her up, and now she's in the White House. And I
Yeah,
certainly think
well,
Nikki
look, I
Haley.
don't want to get into Kamala Harris too much, but it's like comparing apples and oranges to Nikki Haley. Kamala Harris identifies first and foremost as black, and she played the black card, and the Democratic Party was looking for the black card, and so was President Biden at the time. So,
Well, it's complicated. I mean, I don't know you.
Americans, but she is not an Indian American, frankly, even though, she identifies. That's not what she puts out first and foremost politically. So she'll
I
only do
will
that
say
when it feels like it's
there's no question in the Indian American community there are people who understand the dichotomy that Kamala Harris faces. But she does talk about her mom. She is
She
half
only shows
Indian.
up during the holidays too, like Diwali. So, like I said, I have yet to see a campaign where she's running for the support of the Indian ticket. Okay, so show me that campaign ad, and then I'll, maybe my position will change. But again, I think Kamala Harris. I don't know of a single Indian person right now who aligns with Kamala Harris as an Indian American, someone who champions for the Indian American community. So those are
Well,
just
I
my
mean,
thoughts.
I will strongly disagree with you there. I think there are a
Well, show
lot
me
of
the
folks
evidence. Show
that
me
are.
the proof. Show me the people on the
I
ground who
mean,
say Kamala
if
Harris is
what
championing and advocating for the Indian American community. I don't
look,
see her
she
doing it.
she actually did have a Diwali party at her house this past year,
Exactly.
and she had
So
one,
that's
and
my
she had one at
point.
the White. There was one at the White House too,
She only
and the
shows
State
up for
Department.
the holidays. How quite convenient.
Well,
Exactly.
look,
That's my
I think
point.
it's a really easy win because the community's so diverse and there's all these divisive issues. So
Exactly.
celebrating a holiday is
All
really easy for
politics.
a
So I
politician to
think
do.
Nikki Haley is going to be a breath of fresh air. And I think the Indian community is looking for Nikki Haley to really signal that she is looking for that support from the Indian American community. So we'll see.
I will say that Haley hasn't delved too much into all of this stuff, and we'll get more of a sense of her positioning moving forward. Certainly, it's been challenging for Kamala Harris to win support from all these different groups, and there has been criticism towards the vice president
And as
on
usual,
that.
race is going to matter. Race will matter. Background will matter.
Well, we are going to get into another topic now involving something that's happened to you in Washington State and some other journalists that have been affected by the way political leaders are addressing independent journalists. And you've been on the front lines pushing back really hard at the local officials, state officials in Washington State, making a name for yourself that has resonated to the governor's office. Explain this, Jonathan. To me, it's fascinating as a journalist. You want to be able to get access. And during this COVID period, a lot of these political folks around the country have really mitigated access to those of us who want to question and scrutinize their behavior. But you have now the black and white evidence to showcase that some of these folks have been deliberately leaving you out of the loop.
Yeah, the headline here is it's now a fact. Now we know certain politicians who happen to be Democrats, which includes the mayor's office in Seattle, which includes the governor's office and the King County executive's office, have all iced me out in some form or another. Let's start with the governor's office, Governor Jay Inslee. I've been banned from all of his press conferences because his team basically does not consider me a journalist, even though I've worked for more than 20 years in broadcast television for all the major network affiliates. I've won numerous industry awards. But because I'm being backed by the Discovery Institute, which is a think tank right now, and again, I want to be very clear, I'm just doing a media fellowship. Journalists do fellowships. Because of that, they've decided to say I'm not a journalist, but it's typical playbook. I've been hammering them with inconvenient truths and trying to hold them accountable. And what their playbook is discredit and then dismiss. Discredit, then dismiss. And that's what they've been doing. And a local, independent journalist, Brandy Cruz, she's a podcaster here. She did the public disclosure request and she found reams of emails. Clearly, in the governor's office, the press person, the media handlers colluding with other agencies as well, saying, how do we handle Brandy Cruz, Jonathan Choe, and some of the other conservative think tanks out there when, we have basic questions about COVID policy or about the homeless crisis. And it's happening in the King County executive's office too. We've played it on protected speech this past summer. I went after Dow Constantine, the King County executive, because he was trying to ram through a homeless megaplex near the Chinatown International District without consulting the community, and they were outraged. So, I went after him, and he pretty much called me, a Proud Boys sympathizer, and said I wasn't a journalist. So now we know that he's iced me out, and unfortunately, with Mayor Bruce Harrell, the Seattle mayor, we're on good terms personally. And whenever I see him in person, he answers all of my questions. And I haven't been officially banned from any of their press conferences, at least in writing, like I have from the governor's office or Dow Constantine's. But his press person doesn't respond to any of my email inquiries, and I'm no longer on their RSVP list. So the way I've been getting around that is, obviously I have other journalists in the industry who tell me, hey, the mayor's going to be at this event, or I'll just show up. And they have yet to deny me. So that's just kind of the way I'm dealing with things. Common denominator here is this. They're all Democrats. And let me say, I'm a moderate. I don't align with any political party. I'm an independent. But the Democrats are the only ones who are behaving this way. Not a single Republican in the state of Washington has iced me out or denied me. So I find that quite fascinating, that's what's happening.
Well, I think maybe some of the pushback is, Jonathan, is the Discovery Institute, who you work for currently, is aligned with conservatives, right? It's funded primarily by conservatives. And so they're looking at you as an adversary towards their policies. I mean, don't you think some of that criticism might be valid?
I think definitely that is the criticism. I don't think it's valid because when I'm under a media fellowship, okay, I'm not technically, one of the, longtime academics writing white papers. When I was brought in at Discovery Institute, about 8 months ago, I told them I want to operate objectively, fairly, accurately towards all my stories and have the autonomy to pursue whatever I want. The same way I've done it for 20 plus years working in corporate media. My president, Steve Burai, says, absolutely, that's all we're looking for. We don't want you to be pushing an agenda. We just want you to continue your work as a journalist covering the homeless crisis in the city, because if you don't, no one else will. And that was flattering at the time, but looking back in hindsight, he was right. I'm one of the few journalists left in the entire state covering the homeless crisis, and I may be the only one from a broadcast television video standpoint doing it every single day on this beat. And this is an ugly crisis. And what's happened is it showed a lot of failed policies or policies like Housing First that are not working. And I'm calling it out through my reporting and journalism. And they don't like it. So all I'm asking with any politician who decides to, determine who's a journalist and who's not, first of all, I can't believe we're giving these political elected officials who are public servants the power to determine who's a journalist or who's not. Get to know each individual and look at their entire body of work. I've done this for 20 years, okay? And I worked at Como News, the ABC affiliate in Seattle, for 2 years prior. So they all know who I am. I don't suddenly change just like that overnight and decide to be an activist or, a conservative, think tank guy who just decides to push an agenda. I'm not doing that. Look at my work. I'm trying to get both sides. And here's the kicker. I'm giving them an opportunity to respond to any concerns or allegations, but they're refusing to. So obviously that's horrible optics for them. It's like, what are they hiding? If they've got nothing to hide, just answer the questions. It just happens to be my questions always raise inconvenient truths, and I've become a thorn in their side. So clearly now I know they've decided to ice me out, but I'm going to keep on reporting as I always have.
Well, I think what is telling here is that, as you have said on this show many times, as you say in private, the video don't lie. I mean, you are out there on the front lines documenting a horrific crisis that's going on in Seattle. It is, I mean, frankly, it gets a little too much for me to see on the screen when we do this program, because you're astonished that there are so many people living in squalor that are being ignored, and billions of dollars are being spent to ostensibly help these folks. And you've got to hold someone accountable. The public officials are making decisions. They're trying to be informed about how to go about housing people, how to go about helping folks with addiction. And yet, we see this crisis exploding, and it's not just in Seattle. It is all over America. And so we do need journalists to hold them accountable. I think part of the reason they are trying to discredit you is because you actually tell powerful narrative stories. You are actually showing what's going on in the ground. I've seen you go to Seattle, not just Seattle, but I've seen you go to Portland. I've seen you go to Washington, D.C., spending time with all these thought leaders trying to tell these stories. So, of course, they're trying to say, hey, you're biased. But the reality is that each and every day, because you are churning out content at a level that, frankly, I have not seen anyone else do. I mean, it's not just because you and I have known each other for decades. I haven't seen anyone else put out this kind of content. So that's why I understand there's a pushback. And for those of you watching this program that don't realize this, literally journalists are outgunned 10-1 versus PR/comms people. So
Yep.
they do want to control the message, whether it's a political organization or whether that's a corporation. We're all grossly outgunned all over America. So when you have someone actually peeling back the layers, showing the truth, that's really difficult. My question to you is, Jonathan, I don't think, knowing you as I do, I don't think you regret taking this fellowship, but do you think it takes some of your credibility away? I mean, do you think you should have just stuck with quote unquote mainstream? Could you have done the kind of reporting that you've been doing had you stayed down that kind of traditional path that most of us take to get and stay in this business?
Short answer is I have zero regrets. It's the best decision I ever made. I mean, it's a time for me to pivot anyway in my career. Look, I still have opportunities to go back into corporate media, but like you said, I wouldn't be able to show this stuff. This isn't quote unquote brand safe. I mean, Kapur, I think we can say on this show now that even YouTube has suspended you guys, unfortunately, because of my video, a clip that's, aired on your program. And of course, you're back on. But I mean, my goodness, these are the raw realities that are happening in America. We're losing an entire generation to fentanyl overdoses every single day. People are living in squalor. These are America's slums. Of course, we have to talk about this. These are the raw realities. And if we don't cover this stuff, we can't hold our public officials accountable, because our public officials will ultimately always want to say, hey, our policies are working, everything's great. But the people who have to see this, live through this every single day, the business owners, the neighbors, and the homeless, who are the most vulnerable, who shouldn't have to live this way, are impacted if journalists don't cover this stuff. So, look, we're going to keep on doing it. That's why our show's called Protected Speech, because we can talk about this here.
Well, let's get into another raw reality that we might have to blur a little bit as well, because as you're out there doing reporting in Seattle, showing what's going on the ground, you had a young man quite literally come at you with an axe. I don't think I've ever seen this before, a journalist coming at you with an axe, but if it had to happen to someone, yes, it probably would happen to you, Jonathan. So explain the situation. Obviously, people saw this online and were just going bonkers over this. Give us some context.
Yeah, this just shows also the risk, why many journalists don't want to cover this beat, because there are risks. Not only is it grimy and nasty at times, because you have to step through feces and drug needles, you have a lot of unhinged people, folks who are homeless. And, I was covering a homeless encampment sweep, and there was a fella, a homeless kid, who noticed me recording and didn't want me there. And I wasn't even pointing the camera at him. I was showing the aftermath of a sweep. And I spotted this figure coming at me, and I realized he was holding a hatchet, an axe, essentially, and was swinging it wildly. And, I ran track in high school, and I'm definitely older and a little heavier, but I can still run. And that's what I decided to do. I kept recording as I always do, but I just boogied out of there. And this is happening just a block away from Seattle City Hall in the downtown core. And, this encampment keeps on coming back over and over again. But just because there's a tent there doesn't mean they're homeless. And that was part of my story, that these so called trap tents are actually set up by drug addicts and drug dealers to essentially do illicit activity and trade stolen goods and sell stolen goods. And I exposed that. And the city has just been dealing with this now for more than a year, this encampment that keeps coming back over and over and over again. And it just happens to be that this young man who's a fentanyl addict came at me. And the kicker here to the story is his grandmother sadly noticed him in the video and reached out to me and said, "Jonathan, can you please file a police report? Because that's the only way to get my grandson back home. Because this young man was just released, even against the will of his grandmother, by a judge in King County. He got in trouble, some type of assault, but the judge released him back into his grandma's custody. And his grandma says, I can't control him. This man needs to be, in custody behind bars, rehabilitated." And the judge refused. And now he's out. And the grandma, I'm going to interview her this weekend, but who knows where he is right now. So I got to file that police report. So this is kind of sometimes when the story becomes personal. And this is one of those instances.
And this young man, I understand he's been addicted to drugs for some time. And how old is he now?
He's 15 years old. And his grandma told me he was addicted to fentanyl since the age of 10. No father in his life, broken family, no idea where the mother is, no idea what the backstory is. But man, like I've always said, there's no one size fits all to the homeless crisis. Everyone's at different points. You've got everyone from the single mom who just, lost her job, whose rent increased by $500 and now she's homeless, to somebody who's chronically homeless, who just wants to do the drugs out in the streets and wants to live the nomadic lifestyle. And then you have this young man, I don't know his full background, but a grandma who loves him, wants to save him, get him off the streets, but he's running wild. So again, it is just one of the most complicated issues in this nation, and I'm just hoping the mainstream media continues to cover it more ferociously than it has up to this point. But that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, Kapur.
Well, I don't think the mainstream media has a stomach to show this stuff. That's the honest truth, because they have advertising to run and brands they want consumers to support, and this is not palatable.
Suspended off of YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, for those of you watching us online or listening to this, there is a lot of censorship through big tech. There is, and they block a lot of stuff, and we have been blocked on Dia TV's respective channels repeatedly. And you have to dance around it. You got to appeal and petition, and hopefully you have a friend at one of these companies. But we've both experienced that through these different tech channels, and thank goodness we have an actual television platform. Because if we did not, we could never express ourselves to the full extent that we'd like to. That's the honest truth. And even we are regulated through the FCC. So you get into real trouble, and that could be the ultimate kibosh. But yeah, this is what's going on, and I can understand why Jonathan offends a few politicians that are looking to get reelected time and time again.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I do need to get into something that is also equally as tragic, and it's our AAPI segment, which is going to be extended a little bit this week, supported by the California Public Library. It's a state of California initiative, and the AAPI hates. It was just horrific. We had two graphic shootings taking place in the state of California, one in Monterey Park, the second in Half Moon Bay. These are communities that folks don't normally talk about. Monterey Park, a very large Asian American community in Southern California. Half Moon Bay, a coastal community in Northern California. Not really known to have a very large Asian American community, but in both instances, we had Asian American shooters that harmed members of the community seemingly deliberately. Jonathan, let's talk about Monterey Park first. Southern California, again, very robust Asian American community. They were actually in the process of celebrating Lunar New Year when this shooting took place. Just horrific to hear the details from that venue.
Yeah, it was just so shocking. It was a dance hall. 72-year-old Vietnamese man just going on a rampage and killing a woman, injuring scores of people, and unfortunately, he killed himself as well. So I think
Yeah,
it was just
I
shocking.
think I think the total, Jonathan, just to be clear, 11 people killed, 10 others injured. I mean, just unheard of, especially targeting Asian Americans.
Yeah, and these two incidents happened so, literally just a few days apart, right? And I think that's why it was so shocking. Everyone always thinks, mass shooter, young white kid, right? Disillusioned. But middle-aged, senior citizen, Asian American shooters, I mean, Asian American victims, I think this was really shocking for the Asian American community. And I want to be very clear, this segment we do, it's called AAP I Hate. It's not just, a non-Asian person beating the hell out of an Asian grandma. I mean, we're tackling these issues really impacting the community, in the Asian American community. And this was just absolutely stunning, especially when you perpetrator is one of your own, right? You just don't hear about this that often.
Right, and there was a bit of a silver lining. I mean, again, this episode's had a lot of powerful stuff going on in it. Brandon Say, a young man whose parents owned one of these dance halls. So the shooting took place at one dance hall in Monterey Park. Then the shooter actually went to another dance venue in Alhambra, California, and that's when Brandon Say, who actually was working for his parents, he's actually was taking tickets. So you have a lot of like senior citizens
Yep.
dancing at this place. It sounds like a lovely venue, a nice place to go on a Friday or Saturday night.
Yeah.
They, he confronted the shooter. Basically, the shooter was, within a spitting distance, and Say wrestled the gun out of his hands, and it was caught on surveillance video. And Brandon Say has become a hero to this community because God knows how many other folks could have been killed in that scenario. And so he wrestled the gun away. The perpetrator then left and actually, took his own life. But Brandon Say has been celebrated for being a hero, and now there are funds that are going towards him, but he wants to redirect that to the Asian American community, and there's all
Yeah.
these different efforts to help support these families. And we're talking about 21 victims, 10 of which lost their lives. I mean, a substantial mourning and grief and despair. And Say is actually going to be honored in Washington at the State of the Union with President Biden. So he's gotten his name out there for doing something very heroic. But I saw an interview with him, and he said he was scared to death. He thought his own life was going to be taken at that instant, and something came over him. And he was a younger man than the assailant, and he wrestled that gun away. Just
Yeah, but if you look at the
remarkable
video, I mean, I
situation.
saw that video over and over, but he did it so calmly too, right? I mean, who knew what was going through his mind? But man, to have the patience not to shoot the 72-year-old either once he wrestled the gun away. I mean, I think the first thing I would have done is I would have blasted the guy. But it's really an incredible story.
Well,
And
I saw all the people telling you to do something like that with that guy with the axe came after you. I mean, I
yeah,
know he's a
everyone's telling me to,
teenager.
to carry. Concealing carry is legal here in Washington State, but man, you just don't know. And I think we'll never know the motive, right? Really, the true motive of this man. And the Half Moon Bay shooter, we know Asian male as well. He's a farm worker, disgruntled, over $100 bill that his boss wanted him to pay over damage done to a forklift. But what triggers someone, no pun intended, to take that next step? So I think a lot of debate about mental illness as well has emerged in the Asian American community, but especially for Asian men, especially older Asian men, that generation told to kind of keep it all in and not talk about it, right? Our generation's a little different. We're caught between the millennials and the older folks, like our grandparents or our parents even. And, thankfully, I had parents who wanted me to talk about things all the time. And you've been given that freedom too. But a lot of these older guys, especially these immigrant guys who don't even speak English, they don't have an outlet because it's not, open like that in the culture, and I know things are changing. But I can only imagine the mental health impact and mental illness playing a role in these shootings.
And the man who allegedly killed 7 people in Half Moon Bay actually did a phone interview with a local TV station here in the Bay Area and admitted to doing the killing, and said that he was disrespected, which is
Yeah,
why he did this. And I think there is a larger conversation to be had because so many people, it's not just old Asian American men, so many people around the globe have been impacted by obviously the effects of the pandemic. There's economic strife, especially if you're an immigrant, not
yeah,
necessarily speaking the language, trying to assimilate. And again, some of the victims in Half Moon Bay specifically were farm workers.
yeah,
And now the state of California, the local authorities in San Mateo County are going to do an investigation on how these people were treated. Frankly, as someone that lives fairly close to Half Moon Bay, I had no idea there were actually farm workers in that region because most of the produce in California comes from the Central Valley, comes from the Salinas Valley. You don't hear about as many small farms along the California coast, really close to San Francisco, but there are some, and these people have all been left behind and living in conditions that were obviously apparently deplorable. So a lot of layers to this, and it's terribly tragic for Asian Americans around the country to deal with, and another story that we unfortunately had to talk about, and certainly I hope we have greater conversations about the mental health challenges that so many people are facing. Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of Protected Speech. Jonathan, stay safe. Please stay safe after this episode, man. That was wild. And for all of you listening, supporting us, we really appreciate it. We'll see you again next week.